Chapter 17, Reconstruction. Section 1, Rebuilding the South. After the Civil War was over, the United States had the challenge of what to do with the southern states. So begins the process of Reconstruction. Reconstruction was the process of readmitting the former Confederate states to the Union, which lasted from a time period of 1865 to 1877. Now, as we know, the Civil War, the South had been severely damaged by war. Many faced starvation, banks had failed, meaning there was no money that worked, and merchants went bankrupt. Now, there will be various plans that will be put out there as to how to bring the southern states back. So we're going to start with Abraham Lincoln's Reconstruction Plan. He had started coming up with a plan prior to the war ending. His plan was called the 10% Plan, and it offered amnesty, which means an official pardon, to all Southerners. Southerners, in order to get this amnesty, had to swear allegiance to the Union, meaning the United States, and they had to agree that slavery was illegal. New state governments could then be formed once 10% of all the voters had made these pledges. Lincoln wanted to restore order quickly. He felt that the South had already suffered enough, and he wanted to make it as easy as possible for the southern states to come back. Well, some people didn't think that Lincoln's 10% plan went far enough to punish the South. So there were two Republicans. One was a senator, whose name was Benjamin Wade, and a representative named Henry Davis. They came up with their own plan, which became known as the Wade-Davis Bill. To be readmitted into the Union, a state had to ban slavery, and a majority of adult males had to take a loyalty oath. Only Southerners who swore they had never supported the Confederacy could vote or hold office. Now, this is a lot stricter than Lincoln's 10% plan, so Lincoln refused to sign the bill into law. Lincoln also urged Congress to propose the 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment banned slavery in the United States. It made slavery illegal. And this amendment was ratified, which means passed, and it eventually took effect on December 18th, 1865, officially ending slavery in the entire United States. Now that slaves have been freed, the problem is what was going to happen to these freed slaves. So many changes are going to occur. First, during slavery, the slaves could not legally marry. Now, they had their own little ceremonies that they did as kind of a way to say they were married, but they illegally were not married. So now these couples who felt like they were married legalized their marriages at this point. Families went searching for members who had been sold away. Many ex-slaves moved from mostly white counties in the South to places where more African Americans lived. And freed people demanded the same economic and political rights as white citizens. Congress will establish the Freedmen's Bureau in 1865. This body was to provide relief for freed people and certain poor people in the South. So it wasn't just for ex-slaves, it was for all poor people really living in the South. The Freedmen's Bureau distributed food and provided education and legal help. And the Freedmen's Bureau also established 3,000 schools throughout the South for African Americans, as well as several universities. One famous university that was created in 1867 with the Freedmen's Bureau is Howard University. It was created by a general in the United States Army named Oliver Howard. And that was a university for African Americans. On April 14th, 1865, while he and his wife were watching a play, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, shot and killed by a man named John Wilkes Booth, who was a Confederate soldier, and obviously upset that Lincoln has, freed slaves. And he got into the booth where Lincoln and his wife were watching it, and shot him in the back of the head behind his left ear. Then he jumps off the balcony and runs off. Now, by jumping off the balcony, he did break his leg, so he did get hurt, and he eventually will die. But Lincoln managed to last a night, so he was dragged over to a house across the street, where he eventually died the next day. Vice President Andrew Johnson will become president. Now, Andrew Johnson is just relatively new to the job. He was put in, he was on the second inaugural ticket of Abraham Lincoln's. He is a Democrat and former slave owner, but he thought by having a Democrat and former slaveholder as a running mate that the border states would be less likely to leave the Union. Now, Andrew Johnson's Reconstruction plan was similar to Abraham Lincoln's, so he made it lenient, but it included the need for wealthy Southerners and former Confederate officials to receive presidential pardons in order to receive amnesty. Johnson appointed a temporary governor to lead each state, and states were required to revise their constitutions and declare that secession was illegal. States also had to ratify the 13th Amendment and refuse to pay Confederate debts. Once that happened, they could start appointing representatives and senators to go to Congress. All southern states except Texas had created new governments by 1865. Johnson had declared that the Union had been restored. However, members of Congress were not happy with Johnson and his plan, and they refused to admit the southern states back into the Union because too many of the newly elected representatives from these states had been leaders of the Confederacy, and that didn't sit well with them. So they did not readmit the southern states. So Reconstruction is not over, and we'll talk more in the next section about that. That is the end of Section 1.